Okay, everybody, welcome again. Thank you very much for joining us. Today, we have 2023 risk management options for small farmers. My name is Florencia Colella. I'm a farm business management educator with Michigan State University. My pronouns are she or they, and I am multiracial. And I am very, very honored to be with Phil Preston, a senior crop insurance specialist with GreenStone Farm Credit Services, and with Kyle Knapp, production adjustment chief at the Farm Service Agency. So I wanted to introduce Phil and Kyle. So here's where I'm going to get started. Kyle worked for the Michigan Farm Service Agency for 8 years. He has served as a program technician and county executive director in various county offices in Michigan prior to becoming the production adjustment chief at the Michigan FSA state office in East Lansing. He graduated from Adrian College with a bachelor's in biology and a bachelor's in environmental sciences. He's going to cover the NAP program today. And Phil graduated from Lake Superior State University, so LSSU. He has a bachelor's in environmental and business management. He began his crop insurance career in 2015 as a crop claims adjuster and now serves West Michigan as a senior crop insurance specialist on GreenStone Farm Credit Services fruit and specialty crop team. He also owns a small beekeeping operation in Ottawa and Muskegon counties, and he has kept bees in some capacity for almost 30 years. He is going to be covering the microfarm program today. And I also wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping, so I'm going to come back here. And so if there's anything you want to express during the webinar, including questions, you may type them in the chat box. You're also able to unmute yourself and show your video if you prefer to do it that way. But please stay muted when you're not speaking, or I may have to mute you if there's background noise. If there are any questions we are unable to answer live, we'll send the answers in the follow-up email that you'll receive after the meeting. I've also enabled automatic live transcription for our deaf or hard of hearing participants. This automatically adds text to the bottom of the video with a real-time automatic transcription. You can take a moment now to turn it on or off. If you're joining from a computer, you can do that by going to the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And on cell phones, settings are just a bit different, but you should be able to find them by going to your Zoom options. We also would like to acknowledge that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ardabwa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, for Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indians and Indigenous peoples. Also, MSU Extension programs are open to everyone, and we are required to ensure civil rights policy adherence to report total program participant race and gender data to the United States Department of Agriculture, also known as USDA. Providing this information as a participant is voluntary, but I would really appreciate it if you could take a minute now or later to fill out this form. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. It's not linked, but if you can copy it and paste it into your browser, you can fill that in. This really helps me show the reach of the work that I do. Individual responses are not shared with the USDA and are kept separate from registration and mailing lists. Also, we have an evaluation survey because we know that you love filling out surveys. And that's just, I think there's one question in that survey. It's just to know that whether this program was useful to you or not. So if you could perhaps save that for after you've listened to the program, if you could fill that in too, I would appreciate that. And I'll send a reminder for these two surveys in our follow-up email also. So finally, I'd like to recognize that as adults trying to learn while riding the demands from farming, and life in general. I hope we give each other as much grace and support as we can today. And without further ado, let's get started. So I am going to go to, oh, there was the reminder for the survey. Please, please, please. And I'll kick it off to Phil. So,
okay.
Yeah, you should be able to share over my share, but let me know if you cannot.
Should be able to. Let me know when you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, so my name's Phil Preston, this is a picture of our team on our fruit and specialty crop team. We are all a bunch of farm nerds, and we get to kind of get into the best of Michigan agriculture. Michigan is, technically the second most diverse state in the union on cropping, but we like to say we're number one with water. So we're really proud to kind of offer support to the unique agriculture in Michigan. We already kind of covered the quick bio, so I'll skip through that. And there is a picture of my bees, excellent brood pattern. So if you guys are beekeepers, you can nod your head at how great that looks. The federal crop insurance program. So that is kind of the base of this conversation. We'll get into the nitty-gritty on a couple specific programs, and then we'll try to answer as many questions as we can afterward. But just to give you kind of a baseline of what are we even talking about, it was really kind of, it's been around even since predating the full United States. But in 1938, after the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, Congress really started to look at ways to create a safety net for our farms, realizing that food security is one of the most important aspects to a nation. It has quickly become a pillar of the agricultural support net, is considered to be an amazing alternative to supplemental disaster funds and ad hoc payments. And since 1980, it's slowly become more and more of a public-private partnership. That's why someone like me who works for GreenStone Farm Credit is involved in the conversation and not necessarily a direct USDA representative. It has developed very large bipartisan support at the legislature, and has, like we talked about, it's become this private-public partnership. Let's talk about that real quick. The Federal Crop Insurance Act is what creates crop insurance. Step down one level, and then there's the farm bills that help augment, improve, and help the program keep up with the changes of farming, as well as continually addressing new spaces that may be underserved. Then that's all delivered to the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, which is essentially the foundation of the program. They both finance the program through subsidy and through reinsurance. And they're actually the creator of a lot of these programs, either directed through the Farm Bill or through the Act. Then the USDA Risk Management Agency is our, for lack of better words, regulators. They kind of make sure we stay on the tracks, make sure the programs are being administered properly, and help develop underwriting guidelines to make sure the program stays sustainable. Then what's really delivered to you as the potential farmer or customer is the approved insurance provider. So all these programs are offered through a private insurance company, but they're all the exact same tools. No matter the insurance company you buy it from, it's the exact same tool for the exact same cost. So there's going to be sometimes a little premium due from the customer, but then FCIC is offering the insurance company a subsidy to help make sure that premium is reasonable for you. And then me, the agent. So AIPs, these insurance companies, approved insurance providers, don't like to always deliver the insurance policy directly themselves. So they work with insurance agencies like Farm Credits and our competitors to deliver that tool to you as the customer, help you through the process, facilitate and guide you through these programs. So that is why it's always important to make a good relationship with a great agent and have that conversation about your farm, so someone can guide you through the process. The farm bills, like we talked about, augment and change and help the program stay current. And we saw some of the programs we're going to talk about today kind of born out of the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bill. Each case, specialty crops and small farms and underserved areas have been highlighted. And obviously, we're getting ready for the 2023 Farm Bill conversation, which is right around the corner. So we could see, again, more improvements. So whole farm revenue and micro farm revenue protection, those are the two programs we're going to talk about today. I do want to take a split second and just say there are other programs other than these two. In fact, there are a ton of programs. There are corn, soybean, wheat, apple, cherry, peach, blueberry. I could go on, specific programs that are going to be county and location specific, type specific. So that's, again, one of those reasons that this is not going to be a conclusive conversation on crop insurance. It's really a goal to give you some foundations and point you in the direction of working with someone that can support you through the determining what's right for your farm's risk management strategy. These are insurance policies. So micro farm insurance policies, really what we're wanting to talk about the most today, but we can't talk about one without really talking about the other at the same time. So they're sister policies. Operationally, they work very similarly. They have some important differences depending on which policy you're going to use. Both policies take a very holistic or umbrella approach to covering a farming operation. So we really, like I said, we can't cover microfarm without covering its big sister, which originally developed in 2014. So whole farm revenue protection provides a risk. So this is an insurance policy you can purchase for your farm that provides a risk safety net for all the commodities you grow. And essentially, rather than looking at it at the commodity or the vegetable or the individual crop base that you're growing, we're looking at this as a holistic approach in establishing your average revenue by using your history, your farm's history, and developing a guaranteed revenue for your overall farm. Not necessarily revenue that came from a specific crop, but revenue that came from the whole farming operation. It's usable by both small and large farms. I will note here that a lot of the smaller farms were having trouble working their way into qualifying for having the right paperwork for this program, which is why we saw the microfarm program develop to help kind of that underserved segment participate. That doesn't mean you can't use whole farm if it makes better sense for you, but folks that make less than $350,000 a year in annual revenue are going to qualify for a microfarm. Anybody that's over needs to look at whole farm revenue as the alternative. Whole farm revenue and microfarm are the two only insurance policies offered by the USDA RMA and FCIC that are available in all 50 states and all counties. So basically, this is the one insurance product that if you're growing apples in northern Alaska, you can actually still participate, even if that's not something we're normally covering. Okay, so kind of let's get to the nitty gritty. How does it work? What we do is we establish a historical revenue for your farm. We got to know how much you usually make to know what we're insuring. So we do that by either working through your primary farm taxes or helping you break down your existing taxes into what a normal farm tax would look like. And we're going to establish up to a 5-year average. Now, maybe you say you're a new farmer. We need a minimum of 3 years before you can participate in any of these two programs. Other programs do allow, so when we talked about the million other options that are out there, other programs do allow instantaneous participation, so long you're signing up before the annual deadlines. This program does require a minimum of 3 years of historical revenue that exists sometime, unbroken between 2017 and 2021. So this is for whole farm. There is a set forward for microfarm, but what we're going to do is we're going to establish some revenue, average revenue that you make from farming. And essentially, we're going to build that average. We're going to augment that average. So maybe you've had a bad year in there, or maybe you're upward trending. You're just making more money every year as you kind of get your footprint set down and your process created. We have a way of augmenting your average so it's more reflective of what you're actually going to do, not just what you've done. And you can kind of see that there's different scenarios here on how we do that. We could break that down further, but I do think it's one of those moments where you just kind of sit down with a crop insurance agent and talk about what your average might look like. If we have a little time, I'd be happy to help break down a few farms. If we've got some people with information quickly, we can kind of run some scenarios and see what that might look like for their farms. So then we made an average with 3 to 5 years. Now we got to do a projection. So we're going to say, what are we going to do in the insured year? So let's talk about 2023 as our representative moment. We're going to use kind of your average production on the crops you're growing. And then we're going to set a fair and reasonable price, usually a price that we get for that crop that we can get from a USDA place. But if we can't get that from a USDA reference, often we're bugging Kyle about this time of year, asking for Knapp pricing and stuff like that, AMS pricing. But we're going to try to figure out a way to get production times price times acres to set an expected revenue by each one of the crops that you're growing. Now, this is where whole farm revenue and microfarm do delineate a little bit. Microfarm doesn't require it at the crop level, and we don't require any projected price. We can actually use your historical pricing and essentially historical income to establish microfarms. That's where this gets a lot easy. Microfarm gets a lot easier to use for smaller operators that maybe aren't tracking or maybe are selling at a premium price. It's just not represented in the whole farm space. So now we have a projected revenue for your 2023, and we have a historical average. What you're allowed to do as the producer to select a policy is to select, we're going to pick the lower of the projection. Maybe your acres are shrinking, maybe you're downsizing a little bit, or maybe your crop mix is reducing your expected revenue for next year, or your average, whichever one is smaller, and you're going to be allowed to purchase 50 to 75% coverage, which means we're going to guarantee that you're going to make 50 to 75% of that revenue. If you have 1 to 2 crops, if you have 3 crops, we will allow purchase up to 85%. Now, I do want to be specific here. The reason that you had a crop loss needs to be due to either Mother Nature, and there is a list on the policy of all the qualified reasons why you might lose, but it is pretty comprehensive. So wind, rain, freeze, you name it. We've got a lot of droughts, you name it. We've got a lot of things covered in that space. Or market price decline, that is allowable as well. It can't be because your primary job distracted you too much and you just couldn't work your farm as much. It can't be kind of a human cause of loss. It has to be a Mother Nature or a natural cause of loss. We do have that market price as an exception to the rule for human causes of loss. So essentially, yeah, we are going to be guaranteeing a standard revenue. If you missed that revenue due to one of those insured causes of loss, we have to get you back to what you were guaranteed. So the quick example here is if we did all this math and we found out that you were guaranteed $50,000, or maybe it's $10,000, and you purchased that program that you purchased guarantees $10,000. End of the year, you make $8,000. We owe you $2,000. That's how we get to that coverage space. The whole farm revenue product rewards diversification. So as you have more and more crops in your portfolio, and they have to be enough to cover the space. You can't just plant one tomato plant. It's got to be enough to cover a minimum volume. We keep discounting it further, so it gets cheaper and cheaper. So the more diversified, up to 7 crops can make this a very cost-effective program. It's also highly subsidized. So this is one of the USDA's favorites at the moment, FCIC's favorites at the moment. And so up to 75% coverage is 80% subsidized, which means that you're only paying about 20% of the premium cost, which no matter what position you're in makes it a pretty cost-effective tool. There are some unique things going on this year. So if you're a beginning farmer rancher, and this is just in general, meaning that you have owned or managed a farm for less than 10 years, we're going to give you extra 10% subsidy. So now that 80% becomes 90%. And just for 2023, this is a one-off. If you have transitional acreage that are transitioning to organic or organic acreage, you get an additional 10% subsidy, which means that if you do qualify for both beginning farmer rancher and that organic space, this year, the program could be up to free. We do have to charge a minimum of $1 premium. So essentially that 50 to 75% coverage space is only going to cost $1. And it does mean that the 80 and 85% space is going to be substantially reduced in cost for you. So a couple notes on, as we try to talk about the difference between whole farm revenue protection and micro farm revenue protection. Whole farm revenue is really trying to get to the cost to make the revenue that the product brings you at the market level or to make it market ready. So we're not covering losses that maybe, or we're not covering revenue that was lost in the post-production place. So we often say, you know, at the farm gate or making the product ready. The example would be here, if you're packing or sorting or turning berries into jelly or jam, we got to try to back that added value back out. We're only covering the crop loss, not necessarily the conversion. Oh, I see a question. Go ahead and unmute if you want.
Sorry, quick question.
No. Yeah.
If you're a new farmer, you don't have a history. So how do you do those programs if you need a history?
Right. So, if we're being completely honest, that is a problem for this particular program. We need 3 years of minimum history to participate. That said, that's also, we have other programs that might cover the crop specific while you get that history. And then also that's why we've got Kyle on the line too. So there are some programs that can get up right behind your crop immediately. And then as you develop that history, we can continue to expand the available programs available to you. So whole farm revenue, micro farm revenue, we've got to have 3 years. Other programs that you may be qualified for on your farm might be ready first year you're farming.
And then the one thing I wanted to add is that MSU Extension also has lots of programming options for you to get your records together and be able to file those taxes for 3 years before you go meet with your lender.
So like we were talking about whole farm revenue, we're not covering post-production. So this is a good conversation to have with your agent. And this is why one product may become more usable for you than another. Whole farm revenue gives you a little bit more expansion space. You can have up to 7 crops. But if you're vertically integrated or you're doing a lot of your own processing or changes, it can be a challenging tool to make sure that you're pricing yourself right and documenting your losses properly. So that's why it's important to have this conversation with your agent. There is even additional coverage for like replanting. If, for example, one of your crops received more than 20% of its revenue expectation, damage due to too much rain, and you have a chance to replant, there could be replant payments delivered to those specific crops, and essentially you're going to be paying your cost to replant it. And the idea there is the program would much rather pay you to replant the crop than pay you the loss at the end of the year. That might be more dramatic. So it does give you some space to handle those. Okay, so let's step into micro farm and try to delineate some of the differences here. Micro farm acknowledged that whole farm revenue was very challenging for direct marketers, smaller operators, and folks that maybe just didn't have the paper trail to be able to establish the historical revenue and the guarantees. So we still need some taxes and we still need some baseline to understand what we're insuring. But we don't require all the receipts, and it's okay to insure that added production. Maybe you're making, you know, me as a beekeeper, we're turning wax into things, you know, chapsticks and lotions, and we're turning, we're jarring our honey and making it pretty to sell. Or maybe you're a grape producer that is also making your crop into wine. The whole farm revenue doesn't want to ensure that conversion where the micro farm absolutely allows it and makes it very trackable. So it cuts back on record keeping, makes it easier for small, diverse, direct marketers, specialty growers to participate in the program. Rather than offering 7 discounts, up to 7 discounts, it offers just a standard 3. So it doesn't really worry about whether you've got 1 crop or 20 crops. It's just going to kind of give you that standard 3 crop discount, just as highly subsidized as its whole farm revenue sister. So we see up to 80% subsidy at that 75% level. Automatically qualified though for the 80 and 85%. So there's no exclusion based on the number of crops that you're growing. And at this point, we don't even report how many crops you're growing. We're just reporting your expected revenue and your historical revenue based on what you're farming in the next year and in the past. It is limited. So for new producers that are going to enter the program, the initial limit is for anybody that's projecting or has hit a history of $350,000 a year or less. So we want to avoid essentially, if you kind of targeting above that space, whole farm revenue is still there for you because it can go up to 17 million. But for this 350, we're really trying to target that smaller group. It was only $100,000, which really limited who was allowed to participate. We saw this expansion going forward for this year. Now, if you are already in the program and you're just going year to year to year, you are allowed to bump up to $400,000 going forward. So that does keep allowed to keep in that space. I do recommend that as you work with whole farm, micro farm revenue, if you are considering upward trending and trying to break through that $400,000 cap, then work with your agent to understand the limitations and needs of the whole farm revenue program. So as you approach that whole farm revenue program, you start being well prepared for it. It makes the conversion a lot easier. Let's see here. One thing I will note, whole farm revenue does allow you to purchase underlying crop insurance from my side, USDA RMA crop insurance policies to go with the whole farm, so you can diversify your risk underneath it. Micro farm does not allow traditional crop insurance policies or commercial crop insurance policies to go with it. However, I will bring up at the end here, it does allow the USDA FSA's NAP tool to be purchased with it, and there's some benefits to that. We'll cover it kind of at the end of the conversation here. So like I said, micro farm gives a producer the automatic 3-crop discount, originally designed to focus on farms that are doing direct market or local delivery. Really, really good for those producers in that 1 to 3 crop category, but does work for a lot of producers. And what I do love about this one is, even for my operation, it covers that post-production loss. So, you know, it recognizes that that loss occurs not just at the base level, but at the higher level. There is one caveat we need to discuss. If you have 2 different entities that are buying and purchasing crop between them, so maybe you have a producing entity and then a sales entity, unfortunately, at the moment for 2023, that disqualifies usage of the program. It does look like, we're speculating here, but it does look like that may be reconsidered here in the near future. So for the 24 program forward, we may see that that caveat removed. Again, uses a similar 5-year average, but we're stepping forward. Now you noticed in the whole farm, I said that it was 2017 through 2021. This uses a minimum of 3 years starting in 22, going back to 2018. So it does meet up with your most recent year. And that's how we're building your average. And then the projection is just based on your last 3 years of crop revenue. So we're essentially creating a revenue per acre. We're going to multiply that by the number of acres you're starting next year. Again, whichever one is lower, we're going to insure between 50 and 85% of that based on your choices as a guaranteed revenue. I know we talked about it, but I do want to hit this again. The TOGA program, Transitional Organic Grower Assistance Program, is offering an additional 10% subsidy on this program, meaning that it is definitely going to be cost effective for folks that are in that transitional or organic operation. It could mean that it could make the program as much as just $1. That said, even if you don't qualify for this, these programs are generally very cost effective. Both whole farm revenue and micro farm revenue allow you to purchase the NAP program, the non-insured crop disaster assistance program. Kyle's here to cover that. I'm not going to even pretend to be an expert in it, but what I can tell you is if you receive a payment, so NAP is going to apply at your individual crop level. So maybe you're growing 5 different crops, NAP can cover each individual crop. If you have a claim on both whole farm revenue or micro farm revenue and your NAP product, where we owe you a little money due to that loss, NAP can be collected inside the deductible of your micro farm or whole farm program without causing any major disruptions. Now, if your NAP payment exceeds your deductible, now what's the deductible, right? So if you buy 75% of a guaranteed crop revenue, you have 25% on the top not covered, that's your deductible. By 85%, you have 15 on the top, that's your deductible. If your NAP payment exceeds the deductible, then the additional revenue is just counted as revenue before they solve your micro farm or whole farm revenue program. So both are very allowable to be used. And I often recommend it because it helps us target individual losses at the crop level, and then we're also able to cover larger losses at the whole farm level. I always use a perennial example. Maybe you're growing strawberries as well as asparagus and cherries. Maybe across the board, micro farm would cover losses because of pricing loss on the cherries, because of heat damage on the strawberries, you name it. Well, that might come in and take care of the loss in the strawberries a little bit deeper, and then we can still manage some of those losses at the higher end for kind of the umbrella coverage. So highly recommend investigating all programs in a way to diversify your risk management strategy. So out of the gate here, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to ask if there's any questions. I did come prepared. Florencia gave us some fake farms to run through real quick here. So Florencia, if you think we have time to do that now, I'll switch my screens. If we want to wait till the end of the conversation, let people stick around, we can do it then.
I think that we do have time now to go through those examples.
Okay. Let me see how quickly it allows me to switch screens. Let me know when you see the bar graph.
We see them.
Okay, so I've pulled up one of the insurance agency's quoters. There's a half a dozen of them, and then the USDA RMA does have one that you can use as well. I just like the formatting of this one as a great way to deliver the message, so to speak. So let's talk about what are we looking at here. First, I'll start circling some stuff here. One, this producer in 2018, they produced $3,000. Then they produced 5, then 8, then 10, and then 17,000. Now they're upward trending in their production. So I'm able to do what's called an index revenue and actually resolve their average with that growth in mind. So we're going to set their historic average at $17,000. And then the expected revenue based on the last 3 years is going to come to $11,667. So as we discussed out of the gate, this is the lowest of the two, $11,667. So this becomes our average revenue that we're expecting for next year. So the producer is going to be allowed to purchase between 50% guarantee and 85% with the microfarm program. Now, Florencia, quiz for you, or do we want to do it both ways? I can show you. Is this customer farmed less than 10 years?
That's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like. So we at least have 5 years. Let's say that this person's been going for 5 years. We're going to come up here and we're going to say this is a beginning farmer rancher. And we're going to save. So here, right across the bottom, and I know everybody probably needs to get out their glasses here, but right across the bottom is showing our guaranteed revenue for this small farm. So let's say this small farmer was looking at the 75% guarantee. We're going to guarantee that they're going to make $8,750. And because they're a beginning farmer rancher, that is only going to cost them $106 in premium. Now, this is a farmer in Ingham County. You are going to find variances in pricing between each county. Some are going to be a little bit higher, some are going to be a little bit lower. They could choose to come all the way up here and guarantee $9,917, and that's going to cost them $445. Subsidy's not as great at the 80 and 85, but we have those available. And if they want bare bones coverage, they just want to make sure that if there's a massive loss, they've covered their costs or something of that nature. $55 buys them a guarantee of $5,834. So now let's say this person wasn't a beginning farmer rancher. They're just a small farmer farming on the side. They've done it for years, just as additional income. Then you can see that same thing is about twice as expensive through the 50 to 75% territory. They're covering the same dose, but it's still only $212 to guarantee $9,334. So typically very cost-effective tools. Okay, so Florencia gave me another farmer that just started farming and only has 3 years of average, but they're making a good go at it. They've got some decent income so far. So they've only actually farmed in 20, 21, and 22. They made $25,000, $20,000, and $30,000. I have to figure out a 5-year average. So what I do is I take these three, divide them and figure out what their average is. And I put those in the previous 5 years to give me a 5-year average. That means their historic average coming from their taxes is looks like about $26,250 is what we're going to average. And their average from their projection is $25,000. So there you go. We've got 25,000 is the lower of the two numbers at the moment, which means that's the whole number. That's what they're going to be able to purchase an average against. Now, this person's only been farming for 3 years, so they're probably qualified for beginning farmer rancher. And there you go. That's 75% coverage. 75% of that 25,000 is 18,750. That's their guaranteed revenue for the 2023 crop year. And that's only going to cost them $227. So definitely cost effective. We do have all the way up here to $953 of cost to cover $21,250. Obviously a little more expensive, but also covering a much smaller margin. And then we could go all the way down here. They can guarantee $12,500, and that's only going to cost them $117. So definitely a cost-effective bandwidth for folks that are looking at these as ways to kind of stopgap losses or baseline losses to make sure they're always covering their bare minimums. And then Florenzia gave me an established farmer, someone that's been doing this for a minute, still in overall farm size on the smaller side, but definitely producing a decent amount of revenue. So in the most recent year, they produced 60,000, and we've got 50, 55, 40, 45, and 40. Again, upward trending. So we're going to index this and we're going to figure out an average. I also want to point out that when we do that, we are excluding, we're going to use this revenue exclusion to throw out the worst year. So that way, when we run the average, they're getting a really good average. So it's $60,000 is their average. And I want to point out that that's still their best year. So that's our historic. We're indexing them all the way up to their best year, which is the maximum we can index someone. And then indexing meaning increasing your average due to the fact that you have increasing revenue. And then the micro farm expected revenue based on the last 3 years is 55,000. That's essentially their average revenue per acre times the number of acres they're going to be farming. And here we are. We have 75%. They're guaranteed 41,250, and that's only costing $1,000. And then we can go all the way down here, and they are covering 27,500 only for $500. I do want to say maybe this person's been farming well, but we can say, let's say they're a beginning farmer. We can click that button and we see that cost drop to $500, still covering the same 41,250. So maybe they're still in their 10-year bandwidth, but they're definitely past their 5 years. So pretty straightforward. If you don't make this 41,250 and it was due to price loss in the market, or a natural cause of loss, too much sun, bugs, and you're doing your due diligence to try to farm through that. Obviously, if you have bug damage and you weren't managing your bugs through either an organic plan or through conventional means, we have some questions there before we cover anything. But if you're doing your due diligence as a farmer, following all the good farming practices and rain, bugs, you name it, adversely affect your crop. If you don't make this 41,250, the idea of the program here is that we get you back to that 41,250. We can run the example, end of the year, you have a $30,000 year, even though you've normally been doing that 60,000, you purchased a 75, or you had that $55,000 average, excuse me. If you did 30,000, 75% program, I owe you the difference between this 41,250 and the 30,000. So obviously $11,250 as a claim payment. That is my quick spiel. I know I tried to power through to give Kyle enough time to cover his crop plans, but do we have questions out there? If someone wants to put together a fake farm or give me an idea what your farm looks like, I left some blank spaces here to fill out some farms.
Or you can always try and meet with Phil or the local Phil in a more private setting afterwards.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're always happy to help.
Thank you very much, Phil. And so I am going to start my screen share. And Kyle, I will give you control so that you can skip those slides. How did I do that? Remote control. Okay. Take it away, Kyle.
Yep, looks like I'm good. Thank you everybody for joining. Again, I'm Kyle Knapp from Michigan FSA, here to kind of talk about the NAP program and how that can help as another risk management tool in your arsenal of risk management tools for your farms. So again, kind of my team, we have four specialists at the state office here in Michigan. I'm the production adjustment chief. In particular for NAP, Ben Belcombe is our NAP specialist. He works in some other areas as well, some organics, and kind of some other ad hoc programs as they come up, but he tends to be kind of our crop disaster specialist in part of this production adjustment team. So I'll give him a shout out here. But really in FSA structure, you know, the people that you are going to want to be working with for FSA programs are going to be at the local county office. So I've linked here farmers.gov. Hopefully that's pretty easy to remember if you haven't been there. But that's USDA's website, that one of the websites that they provide information to producers and ranchers that can help kind of guide some of your farm decisions. You know, tell you what resources are available from a USDA standpoint, as well as it's got at the bottom of the main page a local service center locator where you can search for your local county service center and figure out, you know, who the county executive director there, get some contact information and be able to work with that office. So again, main point of that is if you aren't familiar with FSA, our organizational structure at the county level, we actually have what's called county committees that are you know, elected essentially farmers and producers or peers in each of these counties where there's offices that are elected by other farmers within the county annually. We have an election cycle, and they help, you know, essentially guide the decisions of that office. So FSA gives the framework within our policy all the way down to the county level. We have various handbooks and regulations, and then the county committee is the one that typically makes those final decisions. They do have, again, a county executive director. You know, in most counties where the county committee has turned over the day-to-day operations and some routine decision making to that county executive director, but ultimately, you know, those county committees are the ones responsible for making those final decisions on application approval or disapproval, or, you know, determining eligibility. So again, a little bit of a unique structure that again, we have this elected board that you know, kind of has the final say. And then we've got, again, a more advanced structure as you go on up. But really, from a producer day-to-day standpoint, you're going to be working with your county office to get things established. So jumping in, you know, what is the NAP program? We've talked about it a little bit. I guess stands for the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. Typically, it covers non-insurable crops that would be left out from, you know, the commercial insurable market. So maybe it's a bit more niche crops, maybe it's value loss crops. You know, again, it's kind of the catch-all, I guess, on a crop by crop basis that FSA covers. So, you know, if you're in a county where you're growing corn and corn's commercially insurable, then that's not something you're going to be able to cover under NAP. But maybe you're growing zucchini, and, you know, zucchini is not commercially insurable, so then you'd actually come to FSA if you want specific crop insurance. So essentially, we are the catch-all for things that commercial insurance won't cover. And obviously, as as some of these farm bills have advanced, and as the USDA has looked at where coverages are, things are becoming more and more integrated, or can work in tandem, as we're seeing with whole farm revenue or micro farm revenue and the NAP program. Again, a NAP kind of covers based on natural disasters. Again, we've kind of talked about that already, that it can't be due to a management decision essentially. But if a natural disaster results in lower yields or crop losses or prevented planting, that would be something typically that NAP would then cover. And the NAP is offered in kind of two formats, either what we call catastrophic coverage or buy-up coverage, which buy-up coverage would result in a premium being assessed. So who's eligible? Again, FSA being a kind of a different organization where most of our programs are typically free to participate in. We have kind of a general set of eligibility that Congress puts out there for participants of who can and cannot participate. So typically with NAP, what we're looking at is, we can call them a producer, a landowner, tenant, and or sharecropper. But the key thing is that they have an ownership share or risk in the crop that's being covered under the NAP program. Individuals or legal entities may apply. Again, there's a certain subset of rules that may be more specific, that may exclude you from applying, that are, again, general to kind of FSA. But again, typically speaking, most individuals or legal entities could look at making an application for NAP coverage. And then we do have an adjusted gross income limit, where if your AGI is over $900,000, it's going to prohibit you from receiving NAP benefits. So then again, kind of going back to now, what crops are eligible? One thing, again, that we want to emphasize is that this is all talking about commercially produced crops. So this concept of like home gardens or things that aren't you may be raising vegetables in your backyard, but they're for your own consumption, they aren't for sale, then that's not going to be something that we would typically cover through the NAP program. So we do need to have a commercial basis for which these crops are grown. And then it also tends to be, crops that aren't covered through, federal crop insurance programs. And then various reasons that they, various aspects of their growing or intended use, they can be grown for food or livestock consumption, can be grown in a controlled environment. We do cover under NAP specialty crops like honey and maple sap. We do value loss crops as well, being aquaculture and Christmas trees, seed crops and propagation. And then there's other crop nuances there that I didn't even have room to cover. So it can be pretty diverse. Again, kind of a when in doubt, if commercial insurance isn't covering it, then it probably can be covered under the NAP program. And I think we've talked about that Michigan is, maybe the second most diverse state agriculturally. And when you look at our national crop table, that is pretty evident with the amount of variety of crops that we have in Michigan. And then anytime we it seems like once or twice a year, we'll get a brand new crop coming up that we have to create a new table record for, because someone in Michigan is saying, hey, I think I can grow this here. Things like I've seen a northern kiwi. We've done a various, different pine nuts. Again, aquaculture has kind of been a new thing coming to us recently. So a lot of diversity that can be covered under the NAP program, but it is all on a crop by crop basis. So the actual mechanism for applying for coverage. So typically what this looks like is you'll have to start that process by working with your county office and submitting a CCC 471 form. Again, that's our NAP application coverage form. Typically on that, you'll elect which crops you want covered, and you'll denote, which coverage levels you want. With that form, you can submit that form, but that form won't take effect. Coverage won't be essentially approved until a service fee is also submitted with it. So we do have service fees that are administrative and they're flat rate. And again, it kind of works by, it's $325 per crop. But essentially, once you get to the third crop in that administrative county, you get somewhat of a discount. So it will cap at $825 per administrative county. Again, we're kind of talking micro farms today or smaller farms, but if you are cropping across multiple county lines, you would need to potentially cover those crops across multiple counties. So multiple applications for coverage would need to be submitted, but then you're actually going to, the system will help track some of this, but there's another kind of limit built in where the total service fee that you could pay as a producer to FSA for cropping in as many counties as you want is going to be $1,950. So there's some built-in kind of discounts. If you're farming in one county and you have 5 acres and you've got 46 different crops on those 5 acres, you're only going to be charged up to that $825 as the administrative fee. So once you get beyond those 3 crops, then we don't assess any more administrative fees for that county. Again, and there's some nuances built into that too that I won't get into, where it talks about planting, the planting time frame, where you could have a difference in crops. Some crops, even though they might have a different technical name, are still lumped together. We see that a lot with peppers, where there's probably 100 known different species of peppers that you could work with or be planting, but we have them grouped into kind of conglomerate crop codes. And so some peppers might be in one crop code and some peppers might be in another one. And so you could be, seeing where all of yours are just considered one crop despite the different species names or variety names. And then some could be spread across, multiple crop codes. So again, that'll be something that you'll work with your local county office to figure out kind of those distinctions based upon what you're growing. Looking at coverage options. So again, we don't get typically as high as like a 75 or 85% coverage. The most that we can do is a 65% coverage on production. But starting off, we'll talk catastrophic coverage. So catastrophic coverage is 50-55. Typically, if you're working with FSA, you can either say CAT coverage or 50-55, and your FSA technician should know what that means. But again, it's going to be 50% of your production level at 55% of FSA's established market price for that. Again, every year when we manage these crop table records, part of the research that we do is looking at figuring out what an average market price is for that region or for that county or the state. A lot of them tend to be set at the state level just for the information that we can get, but sometimes we do have more specific information on markets that we can kind of set it by region or by county. But again, FSA establishes that county expected yield and that average market price. The percentage of production covered can either be based upon your own production history, if you've established that, or it can be based upon the county expected average. And then looking at buy-up coverage, can either, the one thing you'll notice is anytime you get into the buy-up territory, now we're talking that the coverage is based upon 100% of that market price. But then we just start talking about, what level of production do you want coverage? So the lowest level of buy-up coverage is going to be the 50% of production and 100% of the market price, and it goes up by 5% all the way up to 65-100. And the main difference with catastrophic and buy-up coverage is they both have the service fees assessed, but catastrophic does not incur any additional premiums where the buy-up coverage would. And then talking about how NAP premiums are calculated, typically what we do is we look at the producer's share that you're claiming. So if you're 100% owner of the crop, then we'll factor this by 100%. Maybe you're a 50% owner, and so this is going to get factored by 50%. But we take the producer's share, we then multiply it by the acres that you have planted to that, multiplied by the approved yield per acre. Again, if we don't have an APH established, it could be the county expected yield that comes in there. And so I'll show that as a later example. And then we multiply that by the coverage level as a percent. So if it was 65% coverage, the top tier buy-up coverage, we multiply it by 65%, multiplied by the average established market price by FSA, and then 5.25% premium fee on top of that. So this CCC 860, we'll call it for the purposes of today a CCC 860 waiver, because for the NAP program, if anybody has a CCC 860 on file or files it with their application, it can actually lead to additional benefits. Typically, it'll be the waiver of service fees and then the reduction of premiums. So the CCC 860 is actually a form that FSA uses for multiple programs, not just NAP. But what it does is it allows a producer to self-certify that they're either a beginning farmer or rancher, a limited resource farmer or rancher, or a socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher. And so if you fall into one of those categories, you certify to that, and we have that CCC 860 on file. And then, again, waives those administrative service fees for NAP, as well as reduces premiums by 50%. And then getting into the definitions of how FSA defines, socially disadvantaged, typically members of groups that have been subject to racial or ethnic, gender prejudice because of their identity as members of that group. And so typically what we see with that is either Black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Hispanic or Latino, or Asian or Pacific Islanders would qualify for that SDA benefit or filing. And then for some USDA programs, women would also count as one of these groups that the program is looking at, but not for every program. So you'll have to ask the county office, again, if when you're filing this 860 form, if it, that applies or not. Limited resource farmer typically is a measure of historical income. So if historical income is below, there's a chart or a table, as well as kind of a tool that you can use that is on the 860 form. When you're filing it out, it'll help direct if you're below that income point. But if you are, then you would qualify for limited resource farmer or rancher. And then again, beginning farmer or rancher is someone who started farming in any farming operation within the 10-year period. So once we get beyond that 10-year period, beginning farmer and rancher no longer applies. And then beginning with 2022, again, this is kind of hot off the press, just came into effect kind of 2 weeks ago. But in particular with this CCC 860, FSA is determined essentially that because catastrophic coverage with an 860 on file doesn't incur any fees, there's no service fee, and again, catastrophic coverage doesn't have any premiums. Essentially by having the 860 on file and a producer reporting their acreage on an acreage report, which will be a FSA 578 form, they actually can have all of their crops enrolled in NAP coverage just with that interaction. So that would bypass the need of having the CCC 471 NAP application for coverage filed. So again, this is it's actually impacting 2022, despite this coming out in January 2023. So what this will mean is actually producers last year who had a CCC 860 on file and a 578 on file may be receiving a postcard here shortly, or already have, that says for 2022 you actually have NAP coverage, and you can work with your local county office to finalize your application. Again, because it's coming out in January 2023, we've given some wiggle room to kind of meeting some of the deadlines for NAP in terms of turning in production history and notices of loss and what have you, because essentially there's going to be a handful of cases out there where there's people who didn't realize that had NAP coverage that they now do, again, with a catastrophic coverage. So that might be something of interest to people already. So again, if you get that postcard, worthwhile following up with your county office. And even if you don't get that postcard or you haven't gotten it yet, it might be worthwhile checking in with your local county office to see if you've met that requirement, if you've been working with them already. And then again, moving forward in 2023, I think in subsequent years, it looks like that this interaction of just having a CCC 860 and a FSA 578 on file is going to be sufficient enough to determine that you have catastrophic coverage on your crops. But we are still kind of awaiting, essentially official policy for that NAP amendment to come through to see all the nuance and interactions that it may have. So stay tuned, for some more information on that. But definitely for those that do have the 860 on file and have filed a crop report with FSA, there's some benefits already for 2022 that are being employed retroactively. So in talking examples for what does NAP look like, we kind of talked ahead of time of using a 10-acre farm in Ingham County. Again, NAP, it's harder to say, kind of what the revenue is going to look like in that, because we look at specific crops and we look at, again, there's going to be county specific yields and fees potentially, or the county specific prices. And when we look at specific crops, we got to denote it down in acres. So for my examples, what I chose to do is we have a producer in Ingham County who's growing arugula under microgreens, and then they've got 1 acre devoted to that. We've got hybrid tomatoes that are irrigated, and they're growing 5.5 acres of those. And then they're growing 3.5 acres of irrigated red raspberries. And then they've got 15 honeybee colonies. And so when we look at the average, and we can see kind of the example of it later, but essentially what that all works out to is using the expected county yields in Ingham County, and is using anticipated market prices for the 2023 crop year. The actual gross revenue, just to kind of frame this conversation, is a little over $156,000 is what we'd estimate on that 10-acre farm. Again, we're talking for NAP that it's acre and crop specific, but the reason I wanted to bring up that revenue point is just to help kind of contrast the premiums and fees that would be associated. So so all of these crops are grown conventional, so these aren't organic. Again, we could look at organic. Typically what you'll see is that it'll actually change the market price. And so there could be, an influx as far as how market price affects, but otherwise for NAP, there's not too much changes as organic or conventional goes. But in this example, the CCC 860 is not on file. So we've got all the crops are grown in one county. We've got 4 crops total. So that actually is where we've got $825 as our overall service fee, because they hit that single county service fee limit. And then depending on what coverage level you elect, your premiums can range anywhere between $4,110 at the 5,100 level, or the 6,100 level for buy-up. It can be $5,344, leaving that in addition with the service fee, your premiums could be just shy of $6,200, or just slightly below $5,000 essentially for this 10-acre farm. So, and then looking at the catastrophic level, there's no premium fees assessed. So again, that would just be the $825 for the service fee. So again, in contrast to a $156,000 revenue farm, again, this seems relatively, in my opinion, affordable, depending on your basis. And again, you've got options to select, in terms of what coverage you think is most appropriate. And I didn't get into, again, it's per crop, and we can see this in this next example, breaking down the table of coverage levels and premiums associated. But you don't have to select 65-100 across the board. Let's say you want to do 65-100 on tomatoes because they're your largest produced crop, but the rest of it you're just looking at doing 50-100. So you can pick and choose, what level of coverage you want on a crop by crop basis to figure out kind of, what's the amount of premium that you think your farming operation can tolerate, as well as how much coverage of risk do you want. So there are some options, within the NAP program. And again, just showing this where we've got the APH, or the actual production history, or this county expected yield, that's the CEY. In this case, for the example that I've got, all of this should be the county expected yield for Ingham. The market price is what FSA has established as a market price. Some of it could be that we haven't established it yet for 2023, and so it could be based off the 2022 market price, and some of them could be the 2023 that we've got. It won't tell you on this kind of snapshot, but it is something that you can find out with the local FSA office. And then it breaks down, again, each coverage level. It shows the 5.25% premium fee that's in there. It breaks it down by cost per acre. Again, I assumed that everything was 100% share, and then we've got our acres, and then it tells you, based upon coverage, the total premium fee. So moving to this example, so essentially the same parameters, only this time we had a CCC 860 filed for this operation. Same 10 acres, same crops, same acre distribution. And now you can see that fees are much less overall. Again, the service fee is now 0 because we have the CCC 860 on file. So it removes the service fees for this operation. And then premiums are going to be 50% of what they were the last time. So now the range is much lower, and it's more concentrated, where you're between buy-up coverage, your total premium is anywhere between just over $2,000 to just over $2,500. And again, this table breaks it down further. But again, to contrast, again, just to show you that it's working correctly, looking at this table, we can look at the top one for greens. The premium amount here being assessed is $84. And then coming back to this one, now that the CCC is on file, or the CCC 860 is on file, it's now 42. So again, all of these premiums have been cut in half, and then there's no service fees. So for beginning farmers and ranchers, socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and limited resource farmers and ranchers, I think NAP becomes a pretty compelling kind of tool to utilize as a risk management option, just because the service fees being waived and the reduced premiums, is a pretty strong advantage that we offer in that capacity. So getting into kind of the coverage period, again, we kind of got some varying dates of when that coverage period begins. And so it's either the later day of when an application for coverage is filed or when the crop is planted. There are some cases where the crop might be planted, but then you come in for coverage after the fact. And then coverage ends either when the harvest is completed, it's the earlier of when harvest is completed, or maybe you haven't gotten to harvest, but we have a normal harvest date established for the crop. And so that might come up first. And so then that would be the last day of coverage, or then if the crop is abandoned or the acreage is destroyed. And then with FSA, typically with all of our programs, but it is a requirement of NAP, is we do need to have the acreage reported to us of what you actually planted every year. So if you're a NAP participant, this is going to be a requirement that you need to come into the FSA office or work with your FSA office. We are getting more technologically advanced, where we can do things remotely or virtually a bit more in some of these processes. So that's been a more recent improvement in the past couple of years, where you can complete that acreage report and submit the associating tract map. But a lot of the times, how this functionally looks is you can call your office and they can send you a copy of the tract map. You can then fill out on the various fields. You might have multiple tract maps depending the size of your operation, but you can fill out on the various fields, what you planted, how many acres it was devoted to, what was the date of planting, and we can enter that into our acreage reporting system, and then submit out the FSA 578 for your review and signature. And then I just wanted to cover in the conversation of NAP, kind of wanted to cover what our typical deadlines for acreage reporting are across Michigan. So we've got December 15th for any fall seeded small grains. January 2nd is the reporting date for hunting crops. January 15th is our date for like perennial fruit or pretty much any of our perennial crops. July 15th is kind of our catch-all reporting date, where most of the or all other crops that are planted, but a lot of the spring planted or summer planted crops are captured there. And then September 30th is our cropping date for Christmas trees, or reporting date for Christmas trees. If you are planting any crops and they are planted beyond any of these deadlines, say you're again planting like zucchini, let's say July 20th, and it's beyond that reporting date, then typically you have 15 days from the date of planting to report that to FSA for us to count it as a timely filed acreage report. The other aspect with NAP is functionally how do we actually know that there's a loss? And so again, that's going to be required on the producer to notify us when a loss occurs. Again, we do try to do tracking of disaster events and things like that that affect our counties. But again, we might, weather can vary from one side of the road to the other, and especially in Michigan where weather is often fickle. We do require that the producers notify us of when these losses occurred. So typically, what that is you'll submit to us a CCC 576 notice of loss form. Again, typically that needs to be completed within 15 days of when the disaster occurred or when the loss became apparent. There's some nuances within that. Again, if you have perennial crops and it gets winter damaged, over winter, you may not notice that it becomes, damaged or affected until, maybe spring. So the date of disaster compared to the date of apparentness may differ, but you have 15 days typically when the loss becomes apparent to submit that to us. As well as if we get to the end of the coverage period, you typically have 15 days to submit any remaining notices of loss. And then one caveat is that if you have a rapid deteriorating crop or you're a producer of a hand harvested crop, then you got to notify FSA sooner than that 15-day point. You got to do it within 72 hours of when the loss becomes apparent, so we can get a loss adjuster out there a little bit more quickly. And so typically how we meet that burden is you can just call your local office and let them know that you experienced a loss, and they will document that in our receipt for service system. So getting on the subject of loss adjusters, we do have our own loss adjuster contractors that work for FSA. And so what we do is they can be utilized to verify the extent or the conditions that have resulted in a loss. They can do appraisals of production. We do use them for some crops to perform pre-acceptance. Again, I think like strawberries is one that I see the most with this, where every 5 years or so we have them go out and look at a producer's farm with NAP coverage. If they've got NAP coverage on strawberries, we'll have them evaluate kind of the state of that farm, how many acres are devoted to the strawberries that year. Again, kind of as soon as we can in the spring, so that we have that kind of benchmark heading into that year and in the next couple of years in terms of what's the growing capability of that specific farm. So that's what our pre-acceptance work looks like. And then again, sometimes we have them where they'll have to go out and do various activities for us, depending on an ad hoc program that comes up. So just, again, when you sign up for NAP, that is something that you, if you do have a loss, that you'll likely experience working with one of our loss adjusters coming out to your farm. And sometimes too, our local county staff will also accompany them. Sometimes depending on workload or depending on the situation, they may not need to, and it may just be the loss adjuster that makes their way out to your farm. And then kind of the last piece of the puzzle for NAP is it ends up actually utilizing the same form as the notice of loss, or the notice of loss is essentially part B of the CCC 576. But then at the end of the year, at the end of the coverage period, you're going to want to submit your CCC 576 parts D, E, F, and G as applicable, which are the application for pay. And so that's when you're actually going to have your marketing information, your extent of loss information, hopefully completed, and you'll be able to complete that. And then that gives FSA, the basis for determining, did you meet that actual production loss, the threshold, so that we can either trigger a payment or not. Again, you typically with this process, we want to see it within 60 days of the last day of coverage. There is the ability to ask for a waiver that would give you 180 days from the last day of coverage. So you need to request, if you need a waiver, maybe you've got crop that's in storage that you need more time before you market it to determine, kind of the state of loss. But you have 180, you can get up to 180 days as long as you submit for that request for an extension in writing to the county committee. And then typically we want to know when you're turning in production records, whether the crop was marketed, unmarketable, salvaged, what essentially the state of it is. If you have production that you aren't able to market or is not salvageable, and you're claiming a production loss, again, that's where we're going to want to see, that notice for loss, get our loss adjuster out there, potentially do an appraisal. If you have crop that you're looking to destroy because maybe it's got a mold issue and you're worried about it spreading to the remainder of your crop fields, so you're looking to destroy a subset or a stand, to prevent that, again, then that's something that you're going to want to contact FSA, that local office, so we can get a loss adjuster out there and perform an appraisal before you do, so we have a basis of how much production was there. And then the other thing, the kind of the upkeep aspect of NAP, is this APH, actual production history kind of database. So if you're new to the crop and it's your first year producing the crop and you don't have any history producing the crop, that's not going to prohibit you from applying for NAP. You can still apply for NAP and you'll get essentially substitute yields for that. We'll put 4 substitute yields in that are at kind of a reduced point of what the county expected yield is. So you won't just get straight the county expected yield, you'll get a reduction on it. But each year that you produce that crop moving forward, we'll be able to replace one of those substitute yields in that back end of that database, and it'll lessen as well the reduction that is. So again, for newer producers, there is going to be a reduction on that percentage of county expected yield. But as we can see, over time, what your ability is to produce that crop, how close you are getting to that county expected yield, or if you're exceeding it, then we'll be able to supplant that with your actual production history. So with that process, whether you have a loss or not, you are going to be expected through NAP to turn in production records to help create this APH for your specific farm for those specific crops. If you don't have if you're a regular NAP producer, but maybe you've got a rotation and you're not producing a crop in a certain year, then obviously we'll have, kind of a skip period in that APH. Maybe you choose not to cover something in a certain year, but you kind of, cover it some years and don't cover it other years. You can still choose to turn in production of it to keep that APH moving forward, despite not having coverage. So there is some kind of options to work with so that we can keep it as an accurate of a history as possible for your operation and for those crops. And then getting into kind of the additional resources, NAP can be again, this is probably a 10,000 foot view on the NAP program. Again, it's tailored to the individual producer or operation. And so you'll get into, that nitty gritty of the NAP program with your local office as you're filing some of these things, these forms, capturing your histories, establishing your production, etc. But if you want more information on NAP or any, USDA FSA program, kind of the 3 main websites that I would direct you to are farmers.gov, USDA.gov, or FSA.USDA.gov. You can find articles, press releases, fact sheets, etc. The NAP fact sheet currently is about 5 pages long, and it goes into all of the same information. And then there's, sometimes some calculators and different tools that you can work with that will help, give you a better sense of how some of these resources will work. The other thing you can do, again, is sign up for Gov Delivery. So these are monthly articles that the county office will send out, as well as us at the state office will send out. So if you subscribe to FSA Gov Delivery, you'll get both of those. Sometimes we talk about NAP, sometimes we talk about other programs. So you can kind of get the whole sense of what's going on with the FSA, either locally or at the state level each month, as well as you'll get occasionally like new programs that are fresh off the assembly line. You'll get kind of the blast of information from that. And you can sign up for Gov Delivery at your local office. There's a quick way, as well as we offer now SMS texting notifications that you can also sign up at your local office. And if you haven't, keyed in on enough of it yet, the local county office, finding your local county office and working with them is going to be the key to working with FSA. So 100%, 10,000% encourage you to find your local county office and begin that relationship with them moving forward. And then at the last kind of bit, touching on other FSA programs, again, NAP is just one aspect of the things we do. I believe my program area is up to over about 30 acronyms now, if you want to measure kind of our workload in that capacity, with each acronym being a program or being kind of a foundational aspect that helps establish other programs. So some of the other things that we thought might be interesting to you all that we assist with is the Emergency Livestock Disaster Assistance Program, or ELAP, which will cover the losses of eligible livestock, the honeybees, farm-raised fish, due to a natural disaster. Again, this is a kind of a retroactive program. You don't pre-enroll in ELAP. It's once the emergency happens or the disaster happens, then you would work backwards to justify your losses through that. So again, not pre-enrollment for ELAP, but retroactive once the disaster happens. We do offer the organic certification cost share program. Essentially reimburses on the annual fees that it takes to maintain that organic certification. It's a pretty straightforward program where we typically just want you to submit an application, as well as a copy of your certificate, your organic certificate, and then as well as the invoices or bills that you receive to pay for your organic inspection to maintain that certificate. We also, we've had, maybe a dozen ad hoc programs since 2018 that have assisted in various different capacities, whether they've been due to a natural disaster or they've been due to the COVID-19 pandemic, market disruptions going back to like 2018 with some of the trade war with China. So again, we kind of cover a lot of territory. My section is production adjustment, but again, FSA as well. Right now, we have ERP Phase 2 and the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program that are both available. ERP focuses on the natural disaster side, but the Pandemic or PARP program focuses more on the market disruption due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Both of them are revenue-based right now, where they're looking at previous years essentially to establish a revenue basis, and then comparing to current revenue or revenue for the years of application to see if there was a loss of revenue. Those signups are going on until June 2nd. And again, that's kind of the 10,000-foot view on those. But you can sign up for those programs with your local county office as well. And then we do have our more regulated standard Farm Bill programs that we cover. NAP is one of those programs under the Farm Bill, the agricultural revenue coverage and or risk coverage and agriculture, or the price loss coverage programs. So we call that ARC PLC, is one of those other Farm Bill programs that may assist. And again, it makes a payment based off of established base acres. And so if you have established farm records with FSA, you can inquire with your local office to see how many base acres you have and if ARC PLC is relevant to your operation. And then the sign up for that for the 2023 year is March 15th. So you'll need to get an application in. Again, it's typically pretty straightforward. It's more often than not, it's a one-page application, just essentially conveying your interest into the program, and there's no fees associated with that. And again, the key is reaching out to your local FSA office to find out what programs we have, because it's always changing, what you might be eligible for, and what do you maybe need to key in on in the next couple of months, because we may have things kind of in the works that we can help help forecast for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions, and if not, no questions, then we can proceed on with the rest of the discussion.
So since Kyle just mentioned deadlines, I wanted to ask Phil, I don't remember if you mentioned it in your presentation, but it may be a good time for some reminders on deadlines.
Yeah, so deadlines for microfarm and whole farm revenue protection, and then a lot of our spring crop specifically named products like corn, soybeans, wheat, spring planted are generally around March 15th. They are hard deadlines. If you are not enrolled by March 15th, there's not much we can do to kind of retroactive that. That is for microfarm and whole farm. That's going to be specific to our calendar year tax filers and our early tax filers. There is a caveat to that. If you are a late tax filer, kind of the September 30th, October, November filing, that deadline's already passed. That's November 20th. It's pretty rare we find customers in that space, but it does happen. And so that means that 2023 is kind of off the books, but we can still start that conversation and start looking at what that would look like for 2024. I should say also our perennial crops, apples, peaches, cherries, a lot of our tree fruits, blueberries, if they have a specifically named crop for crop insurance, that deadline is November 20th. They want those producers to sign up before an unfortunate winter kill could affect them. Grapes, that's another one. So we are beyond that for 23, but we could be looking at 24.
Okay, so it is 1:30. I want to try and be respectful of people's time, but I want to thank you both, Kyle and Phil, very, very, very much for having been today with me and for the valuable information you have provided. We're going to make the recording available on YouTube, and I just pasted again in the chat the two surveys, the one for demographic information and the one for an evaluation. And with that, I guess just a quick reminder to, if you are not already, start working on your record keeping, get the support for getting your records together for filing taxes from MSU Extension. There's lots of resources available at MSU Extension that can get you to where you need to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next program. I'll stop the recording.